When my girls were young and my wife and I would go out, we'd hire a babysitter, and somewhere right before we'd leave, we'd always tell the girls, now remember, be good. And what we really meant by be good was be righteous, do righteous things, behave. The word good that we come to in the New Testament, as well as the word tov in the Old Testament, are words that have to do with that which is good in the sense of beneficial, that which is healthy, that which is, we might say, we like it. It gives us a sense of well-being. It's not really the idea of righteousness, and it's one of the things that we take our concept of good. We all understand that. If you eat food that's good, you taste it, it tastes delicious to you. When you see that somebody paints a house and you see they did a good job on that, you mean, boy, the lines are tight and the paint, the coverage is good. It's good. It's the way it should be. That's a little different sense than what we mean when we say be good, because now we're talking about behavior. Now we're talking about righteousness. And so even in English, we use the word good in the sense that the Bible uses the words in the Greek, agathos and kalos, and out of the Old Testament, the word tov. I'm Pastor Tim Holscher, and we are in Romans chapter 16. We're looking at how God stabilizes believers, and he's warning the Roman Christians to watch out for believers that really don't care about the immature believers who are struggling. They are struggling with believing these promises of God, and because they struggle believing those promises, they have issues with certain things. We've been over this over the last several months. So if you've been following along, you know exactly what this is all about. And he says, you need to learn to avoid these people. And he says, for these are the kind, they do not serve. They're not serving the Lord Christ. And I believe it's important that he uses Lord here because he's the master. He's the one that's in charge. But they're not really serving him. He says they are serving their own appetites. They're serving what appeals to them. They want to eat meat and they don't want to be a vegetarian because these people are vegetarians out of a religious concern. And they don't want to be trapped in that. And so he says then they use smooth talk and flattery to deceive or to give a false impression to the literally the hearts of the naive, or those that are really, they haven't learned some of these things. And when they're doing that, as we looked at yesterday in verse 19, what they're doing is they are not innocent, because this word innocent, if you remember that we looked at yesterday, means it's not mixed. And it was one of the words that had to do with, well, let's put it this way. Probably many of you have heard that in the first century, because of water quality in a lot of places, almost all of these people, no matter where they lived, over in Israel, through Greece, into Rome, a lot of these people drank wine as a regular part of their diet. Now, they didn't drink wine like we do, where they have a glass and you do all this thing the way people do today. They mixed wine with water and they'd stir that in there. And what that did was that the wine then purified that water, or made it at least healthy for them to drink. And so they mixed them together. And a lot of today, for wine drinkers, that probably sounds very repulsive, but it's the way they did it. But that meant that when you got a glass and you could see that there was wine in there, you also could maybe see that it was pale, or you took a taste of it and you knew that it wasn't full strength. And so this idea of innocent literally means it's not mixed. So you haven't mixed two things together. And I was using the illustration of mixing wine and water. But he says you ought to be innocent towards what is evil. See, when these people up here are using smooth talk and flattery, they sound like they really have the best interest of these people at heart. Look at me. I don't observe a Sabbath. Look at me. I eat meat and nothing's happening to me. You're good. You're fine. Oh, you've been saved long enough. You're mature. And I've used these illustrations before. And they're using these smooth words and flattery to get these people to be okay with them doing what they want to do. That's what it's all about. And so that's not innocent. It's mixed. Their real motive is their own personal appetites, not the growth and maturity of these other believers. So I want to take a look here just for a minute at this idea of good. And I want to go back to Romans 12, where Paul has said this similar thing, where he's talking about the way these people get along. And one of the things that he says here is verse 19, do not take vengeance or revenge, beloved. Leave room for wrath. Vengeance is mine. And then verse 20, he tells them, you know what? If your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. This is the way we ought to be. And he says, do not be overcome by evil. So when you see other people that act in a manner that is lacking in character, you do not respond with evil, but you rather overcome evil with good. Now, here's evil and good. And most of us, when we think of evil, we think of something that is sinister, something vile. But all that word evil meant is it's not what it should be. Many years ago when we were out hiking, we came across some wild apple trees out, and this is late in the fall, and it was hard to reach them because the bears had been getting the lower apples, and we finally managed to get up and get some of the apples up high and ate them. They had no good flavor to them. They were horrible. It's not that they hadn't ripened enough. They just were very blah. And they weren't what you would expect them to be. They were evil in that way. Didn't mean they were sinful. Doesn't mean they were unrighteous. They just weren't what you would expect. He says we ought to do something good. We ought to do something beneficial. That's what the way we ought to respond. Now, we looked at this verse already, but this is in Romans 15. This is chapter 15, and there's verse 1, talking about that the strong ought to bear the weaknesses of the weak and not please ourselves. Each of us is to please his neighbor for his good, for his edification. Your goal ought to be to do something good for others to help them be built up, to become stronger. And you ought to be seeking what is beneficial for that person, not like that person that is shrewd, not that person that has mixed motives and they make it look like they're out to help that immature believer, but in reality, they're there to help themselves. We ought to be looking out for the good, for building up of these weaker brothers. That's good. And so we come back over here to chapter 15 and verse 19. We ought to be wise towards what is good. How do you bring about the good of these other people? This is what we've been looking at. You put them first. You even put up with the things that they are still struggling with. And, as Paul says, you may give those things up for the time for their benefit. But you want to be unmixed with regard to the evil. You do not want to respond and act in a manner that's lacking in character, where you have mixed motives. You don't want to do that. Because you want these believers to grow and mature. You want them to appreciate who they are in Christ. And you want them to be able to act from that as a motive, rather than trying to avoid getting in trouble or trying to earn something. And that's going to come with time. It's not fast, and you can't rush it, because God's the one that's maturing them. Because you want, as we've been saying, not only for you to have a good day, but you want them to come to have a good day in the Lord. Thank you for joining me today.